Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event. I am Emma Komlov-Sorobsky, a senior editor at Poets and Writers magazine, and I am so glad you're here. We are gathered to hear Karen Russell in conversation with Brian Gresko on the eve of the release of Karen's brilliant new book, The Antidote, out tomorrow from Knopf. Tonight, we'll enjoy a short reading from Karen, and then Karen and Brian will be in conversation before we take questions from you, the audience. You can drop these in the chat at any time, and of course, we remind you to use that space respectfully. Also, we'd like to remind you to please keep yourself on mute. Karen and Brian are two of the most wonderful people in all of Booklandia, and it is a profound honor to have them here with us. Karen is the author of 6 books of fiction, including her incendiary debut, St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves, and the New York Times bestsellers Swamplandia and Vampires in the Lemon Grove. She is a MacArthur Fellow, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. These accolades, though, don't begin to take the measure of her genius, which lies in how compassionate and how understanding her engagement with her characters is. Her writing is guided by a radiant empathy that can reveal the wellspring in a dust bowl or the aching heart of the most ornery swamp beast. I can't tell you how many times her works have rescued me personally. If you are grieving, you need her story Haunting Olivia. For strength in times of rage, turn to Reeling for the Empire. And if you're a new mom who'd sell herself to the devil for her kid, please go read Orange World. Alternatively, it makes a terrifically unnerving baby shower gift. Now, The Antidote is poised to help us reckon with the poison of forgetting our histories and to help us risk feeling deeply and lift us to greater moral courage. And still, for all the profound work that Karen does, her cartwheeling language and wonder-lit near worlds remind me that reading can be fun, even when, as Karen once said, writing can feel like summiting Mount Everest and passing your own body along the way. Brian Gresko is himself a writer, illustrator, and educator based in Brooklyn. Their work has appeared on Slate, Longreads, The Atlantic, The Rumpus, and the Los Angeles Review of Books, among numerous other publications. They are also the editor of the anthology When First I Held You. 22 critically acclaimed writers talk about the triumphs, challenges, and transformative experience of fatherhood. Brian was the perfect person to profile Karen for our March-April issue because they share her intelligence and her humane spirit, and it's a gift to be able to have Brian's work in our pages. Just 2 housekeeping reminders before we begin. Please consider pre-ordering Karen's book. You won't have to wait long since it comes out tomorrow, and you can find copies just a click away at bookshop.org. Second, please also consider becoming a member of Poets and Writers for more brilliant profiles like Brian's, as well as essays on the literary life, practical publishing advice, and much more. Everything we do at the magazine is in service of you, the reader, and we'd be so eager and delighted to have you with us. And now, Karen, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Emma. Emma and I have known each other for so many lifetimes, and it's so great to haunt a Zoom room with you. And Brian and I also go way back. And I can't imagine a more beautiful writer or reader or thinker or human. I feel so lucky that, yeah, I get to do this with you, Brian. Grateful to Poets and Writers for this gorgeous piece, for letting me be on the cover. We saw it yesterday at Annie Bloom's Books. My kids were like, not so impressed, but but they saw it like in, I think commerce impresses them and they were like, oh, this is for sale in a store. So they were excited about that. It's so great to, yeah, to kind of share time with you. And I see yeah, some names of true beloveds and yeah, just kind book people. So it's this is one of the first events I've done for this book. So forgive me if I'm um haven't gotten my banter dialed in yet. I'm just going to read a little bit from the opening. This is the prologue, and then I'll read a little bit from the section of the prairie, which is one of the point of view characters in this novel. Deposit 698-18060, Harpoletsky's first memory. It is nowhere you chose to be, and yet here you are. Papa steers your shoulders into the heart of the jack drive. Hundreds of rabbits stare at you through the wire around the fence posts. It feels like looking into the mirror. The rabbits do not want to be in this story either. Men have been working since dawn to herd the wild jacks into this pen. The town has gathered to solve the problem of the rabbits, who chew through rangeland and cropland, who eat the golden wheat your papa turns into money. Worse than locusts, says papa. Every hide brings a penny bounty. So many turnipy, sweating bodies, and a festive feeling in the air, like a penny rubbed between two fingers, like blood shocked into a socket. A smell that reminds you of the room where babies are born. When you try to turn and run away, papa grabs you. There's Mr. O'Malley, Mr. Wadolko, Mr. Zaluski, Mrs. Haig. You can't remember any more names. 100 jointed arms come swinging into the pen that is alive with Jack's, the place of no escape. Now there is only madness, terror of cudgels, terror of axe handles and hammers, terror of being trampled. Papa, help, stop. Rabbits run over your feet. Settle down, Harp. Papa is angry. He pours your name over your head like scalding water. The rabbits are angry. The rabbits are crying and dying. The club's coming down, down, down. If you ain't gonna help, stay clear of us, boy. You are 6 today. Your family will have a party after supper. The cake was cooling when you left for town. You feel sick thinking about it. Cherries come slopping out of the rabbits. Gray skins are slipping under boot heels and wooden bats. Papa shows you what to target, the skulls and the spines of the screaming jacks. It is the fastest way, he says, to stop their screaming. There is another way, a voice cries out inside you. Smash it flat. You watch Papa click into his rhythm and begin to kill alongside the rest of the men. You meet your baby sister's gaze through the fan of her clean fingers. Leda is sitting on your mother's lap. 3 girls you know are watching from outside the fence. The girls are allowed to squeal and shield their faces. You wish you were a girl with them. Down, down, down come the clubs and the planks. Your stomach bulges and flattens. You are screaming with the rabbits. Your birthday wish is to get to the end of this sound. Quiet comes at last. The men's arms rest against their sides like tools in a shed. Women are hanging the dead jacks to dry by their long ears. Every twitching rabbit's foot is stilled. Inside of you, the screaming continues. It goes on and on and on. Papa finds you where you've hidden your eyes behind your hands, your tears inside your palms. We can't let the jacks overrun the whole prairie. No one likes it, son. This is a lie. Many had liked it. You shut your eyes along with the dead rabbits because you did not want to see whose faces were smiling. Here, says Papa, one is still living. You cannot be soft-hearted, Harp. Your father puts the club in your hands. And after that, you are always afraid. And then this is section 1, collapse. There's a series of photographs in the book. They're hole punch negatives from the Farm Securities Administration archives. I bet Brian and I will talk more about them later. The Prairie Witch. A person can lose everything in an instant, a fortune, a family, the sun. I've had to learn this lesson twice in my life. The first time it happened, I was a 15-year-old fugitive from the home for unwed mothers. The second time, I was a prairie witch chained to my cot in a cinder block jailhouse. Your second home, the sheriff liked to say. Officially, I do not exist in his West. Nevertheless, it is a crime to pay me a visit. On Black Sunday, before anybody knew to call it Black Sunday, I woke up in the jailhouse to a sound like a freight train tunneling through me, an ear-splitting howl that seemed to shake the stone walls. My body trembled like a husk on the cot. My fingers clawed into the mattress. For those early moments in the dark, I was nothing but the fear of floating off. What had happened to me while I slept? It felt as if a knife had scraped the marrow from my bones, and something vital inside me had liquefied and drained away. In its place was the new weightlessness, lightness and wrongness, a blanketing whiteness that ran up my spine and seeped out of my mouth. Bankrupt was the word that rose in my mind. At first, I did not recognize the voice crying out for help as my own. I clamped down on the sound, panicked. I could not afford to lose any more ballast. My numb limbs began to prickle with feeling, pins and needles stitching them back to my brain. It was not a happy reunion. 10 white toes sprouted like mushrooms on the edge of a filthy green blanket, waving to me from the outermost limit of what I could make out. A kerosene lantern in the hallway gave off a feeble emerald glow, beyond which the cell plunged into shadow. Not even the pain was mine. It came and went like the wind. Then it drilled through my skin and swallowed the world. Or perhaps the black blizzard was already well underway when I woke up. Choking heat filled the jailhouse along with lashing tails of dust. It occurred to me that I might be buried here before I could recollect who I was. Minutes and hours lost all meaning. I balled up on the cot and prepared to be pulled apart by a cyclone. Eventually, the winds began to weaken. Light cut a pathway across the turbulent sky, and I watched a pale line brightening and widening through the small cell window. A greenish disk hung above the cloud wall, and it took me ages to recognize the sun. It was not midnight after all, but well past noon. I began to remember more about the land beyond this cell, the edgeless prairie. The name of the town where I worked returned to me, Uz, Nebraska, southeast of the Sandhills and west of the Platte. We were 4 years into the worst drought that any newcomer to the plains had ever experienced. Other beings kept older diaries. Hoard cottonwood trees told a millennial story written in wavy circles that no politician had cared to read. Congressmen train themselves to think in election cycles, not planetary ones. They see spiking market highs and lows and forget how to read in circles. Us had been having brownouts for months, plagues of jaws and mandibles. Hoppers rattled down on the tractor cabs from hissing clouds. Thousands of rabbits fanned out over the plains, chewing through anything green. Winged indigo beetles blew in from God alone knew where. Husks shaped like hourglasses that nobody on the high plains had ever seen before 1931. Red sand from Oklahoma and black dirt from Kansas and dove gray earth from the eastern plains formed a rolling ceiling of dust above us that flashed with lightning. The sheriff and his family lived in a 2-story brick frame house facing the jail, parts and blueprint purchased from the Sears Roebuck catalog. It sat on the free side of the property, 500 yards beyond the bars of my 2 by 2 foot window. As the dust blew into my cell, outside things became less and less real. The sheriff's house slimmed to a charcoal sketch, erased, redrawn, and finally lost to sight. The sky was well and truly falling. My job returned to me before my name did. Yes, I am the antidote I learned and remembered. I am a prairie witch. A door swung open onto my life. I could picture my rented room in the boarding house, my poster facing the street. The antidote of Uz, now accepting deposits. I advertised my banking services as a panacea for every ailment from heartburn to nightmares. Some of my customers had made up a little jingle about me, taking the lyrics from my poster. The antidote to lovesickness, the antidote to grief, the antidote to gas pains, the antidote to guilt, the antidote to sleepless nights, the antidote to sweaty palms, the antidote to daydreaming, the antidote to shame. Most everyone on the plains knew about us, even those who denied our existence. The vaults, some called us, the prairie witches. Now I remembered what I did to earn my bread, what I had been doing since I was a much younger woman, absorbing and storing my customers' memories, banking secrets for the townspeople of us, sins and crimes, first and last times, nights of unspeakable horror and dewdrop blue mornings, or who knew what my customers had transferred from their bodies into mine. These were only my guesses. I disappeared into a spacious blankness during my transfers. A witch's body is a room for rent, a vault to store the things people cannot stand to know or bear to forget. Half the town banked with me, and even those who denounced me as a fraud and a blackmailer knew I was open for business in room 11. People paid me to store some portion of their lives, a memory that felt too heavy to carry or too precious for daily reminiscence. And as they whispered their stories into my ear horn, memories lifted out of their bodies and into mine. It was a painless exchange. Nothing my customers told me had ever once disturbed me, because I was not awake to hear them. Cocooned in blue trance, I could dilate to absorb anything. I did not return to my waking mind until the transfer was completed. I know as little about what I contain, I reassured my customers, as a safety deposit box knows about its rocks, as a jar of pickling vinegar knows about its floating roots, as an attic knows about its ghosts. Their dead were alive inside me, patiently waiting to be recollected. The weight of these deposits had refreighted me. After a transfer, I often felt a heavy ache in my ribcage or my pelvis, sometimes a swimmy brightness, like goldfish circling my chest. And in this way, I knew that our exchange had been a success. My new customers would smile sheepishly and say, I wonder what I told you, ma'am. It's gone clean out of my head. Now I understood why my body felt so frighteningly light, why the word bankruptcy kept running through my mind. Something had happened to me that I had not known to fear. I think I'll stop there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Karen. That's gorgeous to hear in your voice.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're here. I have to say, I'm always like you, disabled self view, and it sort of feels like the problem of consciousness generally. And like, and I don't know, apropos of what we'll discuss, I'm sure, in relation to this
Well,
book.
I mean, well, can we start with the setting? Because I'm going to tell you, I learned I've okay, my Dust Bowl history is just very lacking. I maybe had learned about Black Sunday at some point, but
Yeah.
like the Antidote, it did not. I was bankrupt of the memory. So, can you tell us a little bit about like the historical Black Sunday, and then also like what led you to kind of start the book in this
Wow.
incredible event?
Yeah. So the historic Black Sunday, for people who haven't watched Ken Burns' stately documentary, or you know it maybe from Woody Guthrie songs. It was April 14th and 1935. And it started out, it was like actually clear skies. This is a region, the Southern Plains, that had been stricken by drought for years. And prior to that, overplowing and overgrazing, these agricultural practices that had really tilled the fertile soil to powder. Oxidization is this death process. So all of the biodiversity in the soil is dead. It's like loose and bare to the sun. Winds come and pick it up and sweep it into these apocalyptic dust storms. And that is what happened on Black Sunday. And it was a real bankruptcy of fertility in this way, which I also didn't really think about or learn about. I went on a real soil deep dive with this book. So part of what was devastating was there was sort of bank fertility in this soil that could have fed human populations like that we can't even conceive of. And all of this was lost during this period. It gets like really literally swept away, and soil rained down on Congress. It blacked out the sun. People caught out in their fields, thought they had gone blind. So there are all kinds of really dramatic stories about this particular storm. Um, but I think it also will feel resonant to many of us living today. My friend Justin was saying, wow, right now it's the storm of the century of the week. And why would let me just start here and kind of in media res and mid-storm. This book is bookended by the Black Sunday dust storm and the Republican River flooding, which both feel sort of like biblical events. The flooding, it seemed at first like an answer to prayer, but then the plains receives this region of Kansas and Nebraska, they received 24 inches of rain in 24 hours, and the soil is like it's down to hardpan in some places, so there's nothing there to absorb the water, and it's this devastating flood. It felt like the right bookend. This story in some ways is riffing on the book of Job. So having these two extreme weather events did feel sort of like just intuitively right to me and a lot happens because a lot is happening in these characters' lives during that window. But that idea of like an ecological collapse and an economic collapse and its connection to a collapse of memory. Even before I understood what I was doing, I got this idea when I was finishing Swamplandia, my first novel. And I had a very vague sense that it was going to be about the connections between who and what we omit from the stories we tell. And, these sorts of private omissions that can become like a mass denial in aggregate. And I think this idea of like a prairie witch or a vault was a way to kind of think and feel through that.
Hmm. And like, so okay, so 16 years ago, right? And you're on this long journey with
We
the
thought then,
novel.
Brian, you're like your teenager was a baby. So that's like a real good human clock for how long.
Absolutely. I remember the first time interviewing you. there was a baby monitor, and I remember him interview came to an abrupt end when he woke up from his nap. So it's been a while. Um,
Yeah, I
but
remember
we,
that. So you were like, you might hear like the sounds of a shrieking dinosaur in the background, but this is
right.
an infant.
But like you mentioned the deep dive that you went into about the soil. Can you tell us a bit about the research and how that research changed for you over the course of you know, these many years?
Yeah, for sure. So, and I got this idea. I did an initial research trip and went to Pine Ridge and the Sandhills. And I tried to write this book and it just didn't come to life. So then I wrote story collections and a novella that in retrospect, I think really were kind of testing grounds for some of the same, I don't know, themes and questions that show up in the Antidote. One was a horror story about the Homestead Act, kind of set on, Pawnee homelands in Nebraska, called Proving Up, which is now an opera that's amazing and also contains song exposition about the Homestead Act for people that don't remember what it was. That's which is
That's
Missy Mazzolo. Anyway, so let me try to give you like a coherent answer for how the research has changed. I think around like late 2020 here in Portland, we had these terrible wildfires. It was right during the pandemic also. And I was in this room, which is now like my husband's serene office, but used to be our baby and our 3-year-old son's room. And you could just smell the smoke in here. I was, putting towels down around the windows. We have like this poorly insulated house. I think something about that experience, how visceral it was, and seeing ash genuinely falling from the sky, right? Seeing things like somehow in ways that are mysterious to me still, it gave me a different bridge. Whoop, sorry. That was like a
it's all right. You're still here.
um yeah, a different bridge back into and through this book. So this version of the book I started basically from scratch around that time. And my research was a little bit different than it had been for prior things. I just cold called the historian James Ridingen. I had read some of his articles about white settler aggression in this region. He's a Pawnee citizen and historian and now a really dear friend. And I don't know. He was so generous to me, Brian. I mean, he didn't I was a complete stranger. I just, showed up on, a unknown number and he helped me. I couldn't have written this without him. The historian Brock Anderson, who writes about the Northwest Corridor in Nebraska and also writes about Lakota relations with white settlers before and after Wounded Knee, was a huge help to me. I talked to farmers here in Oregon where I could kind of drive out and visit with them. So I think what felt different about this book is just it really feels like a collaboration in a different way than other things I've written. I feel like a lot of people kind of pooled their knowledge and I talked to people, in Nebraska, homesteaders who had lived through the Dust Bowl or had other family ties. It was a different undertaking because, other things I've written, they're either short stories, so it's a little bit of a different demand, or I don't know. I mean, the research I previously did was just being a child and adolescent in South Florida, which is grueling in its own way. But
No,
yeah,
but different than this, and I think it's so interesting to me. It sounds almost metaphorically related to the listening of the witch herself of the antidote. Only in your case, a, a quest, a journey for remembering and recovering, as opposed to forgetting. But one thing that's so interesting to me, because yeah, I talked with James um, as part of the profile, and I mean, there's many incredible things about this book, and one of them that's really special is the land lost acknowledgement that's at the end, which um, James writing and penned. So there is also a very literal collaboration going on here as well, and we can get to the photos in a second too, because I feel like those are also a kind of a collaboration that's happening with the past within these pages. But can you tell us about the land lost acknowledgement and just how that came about?
yeah. This was sort of after the last pass, I had been talking with James. I wanted to have an author's note, and it really felt with this particular book that is sort of, it's certainly not filling in all the holes in, what these giant omissions, but I think it's trying to sort of illuminate some of what's been forgotten and including pathways to other kinds of futures. Um, that felt like a big part of this undertaking too. And I just thought, James is a really powerful writer and speaker. I'm really honored to have his words in this book. And we were talking about land acknowledgements, which have, in the last, I don't know, half decade or so become quite common, and, he expressed to me too, he's like, when these things are, so when there's not like kind of other action taken, when it's just sort of a cul-de-sac, right? Or when there's not kind of material restitution that will then be made, that can feel frustrating to him, which made sense to me. And he was like, what if we included a land lost acknowledgement? And I wish that I was like technologically savvy enough to share my screen with this, but I'll just show people the map and the finished book. Which you guys see it. So it's just a map. You can sort of see this like vast homeland on the Central Plains, and then the tiny reservation in Oklahoma, which then becomes the epicenter of the Dust Bowl, of course. So I think it felt important to both of us to have some bridge to fact after you exit this sort of fictional Nebraska.
Yeah, and it's gorgeous, and it's so interesting. I was thinking, I guess, just when you were talking about that, about this kind of collaborative process, and then also the kind of other kind of, I don't know, like gateway to other texts. You include books that people can also go to and learn more.
Yeah.
That you mentioned already its connection to your own work, which is incredible because over the course of the 16 years, of course, you haven't just been working on this book, you've done so much. And so it's so interesting to see this line from Swamplandia through your story collections kind of coming to fruition here. And then you've got the photographs, which you showed already. But yeah, these photographs, how did those come about? Because they also, like I said, they feel, I guess we should say, they're not meant to be like, well, this is a photograph of a character in the book. They're meant to be evocative of the period. Is that correct? Right?
Yeah, that is. And I'm sorry, my AirPods, this is like a really new manifestation of my anxiety that both AirPods are like jumping out of my ear. I mean,
Like,
generalized anxiety has never been so kind of forceful. Um, yeah, I learned about these hole punched images sort of early on. A lot of my understanding of this period was quite narrow. I now understand, and temporally and geographically bounded. I didn't really understand that, that it's a global story, that there are dust bowls in Palestine and Ceylon, during this period, wherever kind of the so-called new imperialism is underway. So, and there's still, global soil erosion is a huge planetary emergency right now. And it's, this story isn't over and done with, and it's certainly not exclusive to the Southern Plains in the 1930s. But I also was thinking about, Migrant Mother, A Story of Human Erosion in California by Dorothea Lange, and The Grapes of Wrath, and the other kind of ways that what substitutes for memory, right? Like our sort of collective understanding or recording of this period. A lot of it comes from the Farm Securities Administration, previously called the Resettlement Administration's photographs. And the Resettlement Administration was originally created to move largely poor white tenant farmers off of these submarginal lands, these completely degraded lands that had just sort of gone bust, right? Where all the fertility had been killed in the soil onto more fertile lands. So as sort of like the publicity wing of the Resettlement Administration, there's this historical section that is sending photographers out that I know a lot of you will be familiar with. Gordon Parks, Walker Evans, Marion Post Walcott, and they made some of the most incredible photographs of our country. And but also there's this shadow archive of hole punch negatives. And I think it was just a way for me, it models, right, how policy and kind of collective perception are mediated, by these images. And there was one man, Roy Stryker, who is the director of this program. There's a tension from the very beginning in its sort of documentary aims, and also this sort of imperative to make propaganda for the New Deal and the need for and success of these rehabilitation programs and aid programs. So if you guys are nerds like me, you can go to the Library of Congress website and you can see both. You can see there's now that kind of shadow archive of the unpublished, unprinted hole punch negatives is also digitized.
It's incredible. And the other part that came up, and you mentioned this already with the connection to an influence of inspiration from the Book of Job. And I think, right, like when I first started reading, um, Uz was tickling me. And at first, the obvious thing, thinking about Oz and Kansas and the Midwest, and noticing things like even in the section that you read, the word emerald and the kind of magical witch kind of energy. But then I realized from my old Catholic school days that Uz, right, is the land of Uz, is where Job is whisked away from. So tell us a little bit about that kind of influence that made its way into this book.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I also feel like I'm disappointing my wicked superfan nieces who yeah, there's not Ariana Grande's energy. That's a different kind of witch, you know. This is like a traumatized woman selling her oblivion as a cure-all. So there's like there are definitely like the songs are not as good in this book, witches.
They're sad songs in this book.
Yeah. There's some I mean there's some beautiful songs too, but I would say there yeah, I wouldn't I've gotten that question and so I'm happy to talk about it. Thank you, Brian. I know we spoke about this in the interview as well. I'm sure that the movie The Wizard of Oz imprinted strongly upon me. Like you can't actually write about this region and have witches and have a scarecrow narrator, which this book does, without inviting that comparison. The kind of the text that I was more consciously in dialogue with is the Book of Job, and it's set in the land of Uz, not Ooze, which was how I was pronouncing it, like Teenage Mutant Turtle Ooze style. So that was something to learn. Um, I think that there's a farmer in this book, Harp, who he's the only person who is kind of mysteriously unharmed by these dusters. His wheat is still growing, even though no rain has fallen. It feels supernatural to him. He's always been inclined to think of himself as like a failure and an unlucky man. And he finds this kind of bubble of strange luck really disconcerting. He spends a lot of the novel trying to figure out what it might mean, asking why me, and I think that having a long time ago when I first got this idea that I kind of tried and failed to write, that was part of it. I was like, there's going to be someone who it's sort of like Job in reverse. And, part of what's painful for him about feeling like he's been ringed off from his community in a way is, he says extreme luck is extremely lonely. And yeah, I think there are all of the point of view characters in this book after the Black Sunday. That's sort of the catalyst. They're all experiencing sort of unnerving, unusual things, whatever their particular tenuous equilibrium was gets disrupted, and eventually they're united in the same mystery. Takes a little while for that to happen.
And it's wonderful when it does. The novel, I mean, that brings me to the thinking about the novel's structure, and it has quite a wide cast of characters. It's polyphonic, and it no spoilers, but it does have a kind of a late book swerve um, into what is essentially a novella. You did something similar, I feel like, in Swamplandia with the Dredgeman's Revelation, which is essentially a short story that just gets buried into the novel. So, I mean, like, yeah, one, thinking of structure is wild to me. What's your beef with the novel? Why do you keep having to throw in other things in there? And two, like, yeah, tell us about just this wide cast, which includes like a sentient scarecrow and a cat as well.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I don't mean to punt on this great question, Brian. I was just thinking about Florida and the ways that Florida continues to shape me. And there are not many minimalists in Florida that I know of. I think that it is a maximal state, and I think I just am what I am, So that's one answer. I know one book that really meant a lot to me was The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers, and Toni Morrison's Paradise is another one that I'm conscious of. Influence is so mysterious, right? But I would court, I would hope to be influenced by both of those novels. Carson's, it's told there's a deaf mute character who is he is the keeper of the town's secrets. And I'm certain that this conceit, right, of this sort of these women who absorb and store memories for people. I'm sure I owe a great debt to Carson and to John Singer.
Mm.
I think part of the reason it felt right to have a larger cast instead of, say, just following the Prairie Witch through this, which would have been one alternate structure. You know, so much of the book is interested in how there are histories, plural, right? And kind of history is never a monolith. And definitely, I think that was interesting to sort of think about how each of these people is experiencing the same event in these utterly singular ways. Um, and you know, the together and the aloneness of that it felt important to me to sort of signal like people's lives are constrained in very different ways. And you know, what we know about the Dust Bowl, it tends to be a pretty white and a very regional story. And so just wanting to widen the aperture, and also my favorite books often will blend soloists into a chorus. The two I mentioned certainly do that. I think that I do. Yeah, I did. I have the Dredgeman's Revelation. That's sort of it's like a kind of like a fable about what happens when people fail to respect their own limits and nature's limits, and also maybe about what is bankrupt and dangerous about the American myth of reinvention. Or that's how I hope people receive it. Um, so I think that there is that also a novella, and it feels to me like some of the suspense of this book, for me anyway, was sort of why is all what accounts for some of this strange fortune in this town, in this man Harp's life. And it's a way of answering those questions, you know. It's
Mm.
and it's connected to the open secret of the history of our continent, you know, the myths that really can cover over or invert the aggression and violence that go into the so-called settling of the West. And that story is certainly not over.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's an answer, but it felt
That
important.
is,
That novella feels like truly conscious of the book and the heart of the book in a real way.
it is incredible. This book is incredible throughout, but that novella in particular is just like it's so powerful and so moving, and there's so much poetry in this as well as there always is. Your just beautiful acrobatic sentences. It really is like just an amazing thing to witness and to be in these voices. I I'm going to turn to some questions from the audience in a couple minutes, but I wanted to end with something uh, it does connect to the ongoing story of what you just mentioned, uh, ongoing myth making, ongoing forgetting. I mean, this book it's a it's a it's a awful irony that is coming out. This book about forgetting and the terrible toll that forgetting can take on the community is coming out at this time of erasure. You said this thing, I think it was at the launch of Vampires in the Lemon Grove, which has always stuck with me, that you are less interested in dystopia and more interested in utopia. And I definitely feel that impulse at work in the Antidote, especially towards the end when the characters lean into the possibilities of what could happen next, possibilities of what can happen that are different and really facing the,
Yeah.
these past. So yeah, I mean, can you just tell me a little bit, I guess, and maybe all of us, a little bit about some of your hope or your faith for the future and making the world a better place at this time that feels very tough for many of us?
It does feel so tough. I love the poet Maureen McLean had this sort of beautiful, I've just been returning to it because it feels reorienting to me. And she said, I am looking for a way to resist apocalyptic anxiety without denying reality. And so, you know, I think a lot of our concerns are warranted. I've gotten a few questions where like, why the tenor of them, you know, with other, not you, Brian, but with other interviews where it's like, how dare you feel hopeful right now almost? And I think there's like a 12-step maxim, act as if. And I have also thought about this. And it's different than the kind of delusion that I'm writing about in this book. It's different than the kind of sort of willful blinders, or the ones we're ignorant that we have installed in us early. I think to sort of what's certain is that I think a certain kind of cynicism is a true dead end, you know. Um, And I think although this book, it's called The Antidote, again, it's like I think it's a wry title and an earnest title because it's on the one hand, or it's a comic and a tragic one too, right? I mean, this lady is in the long lineage of snake oil salesmen and rainmakers, and what she's selling is just blankness as a palliative for everything, right? From the, daydreaming to heartbreak to chest pains. And that obviously doesn't go so well for anyone in this book or anyone in our world. But I think the antidote, for me, it was really clear, or there was a real earnest desire to shift out of this grammar of resignation. And
Mhm.
so it's a little bit, it feels tonal and it feels like like shifting into a different stance towards what's happening. So while being honest about the real obstacles, right, that we're up against, the section that you mentioned, there's someone who is escaping a campaign of ethnic cleansing on formerly Polish lands that have been now carved up by three empires, Tomas, and he comes to Nebraska. He sees, free Indian lands are offered, and he rides the rails out. And he's exchanging a glance with the other people, other communities, other families that are now being forced to leave their homes to this small reservation on Oklahoma. And he's well aware of what's happening. He knows it intimately from his own history. And there's this real wail of despair in that section. What choice do I have? I'm just one person. I think without pretending that I have like all the answers or that anybody could, I think shifting into sort of what choices do we have feels powerful to me right now. Really asking it like a genuine question, really wanting to like try to make real and plausible visions of a more caring and caretaking society instead of defaulting to a kind of pessimism that really will doom us, I think. I mean, I do think that. And I was looking to, when I was trying to like do that work of tuning my imagination to sort of other visions, because I've certainly written some dystopias and very dark things. Also, Elvia Wink has this beautiful book, Death by Landscape, and in it she talks about how utopias and dystopias are coterminous. Because even if you have a book like Joy Williams' Harrow, there are still the seeds of another world inside that book. You can still see like a countervailing force mounting, and you can still see characters that are resisting what's happening, that want a different world. And I think I love that sort of nuanced way of thinking of it as like a continuum. So in this book, there's a character who is able to make photographs of hell worlds, but also worlds where, and they're blurry and they're moving and they're changing, but it seems like um, there's like plenty for all. Um, and it's so easy to roll your eyes at something like that and call it naive. And I really was thinking when I think about what makes a vision like that feel impossible or feel unlikely, it's such a diagnosis and an indictment of some of the systems that we have in place today. So this is a very long answer to say, if you're not able to access hope, and sometimes I'm not, I think act as if is useful. And Rebecca Solnit has a great, I'm paraphrasing her badly, forgive me, Rebecca, but I was asking Hannah Holloman, who has an incredible book I recommended to everybody, Dust Bowls of Empire. We were talking, and I said, well, what do you tell your students when they feel like an impotent witness to what's happening, when they feel like despairing? And she gave me this Rebecca Solnit quote. She said, well, I tell them to make a friend. And basically, like, there are movements that are underway. There's a lot of good work to be done right now today. Um,
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Okay, I'm going to turn to some questions that have come in from the audience. Um, Coming back to the idea of depositing memories from one person to another via the witch, can you tell us a little bit about where that idea came from?
can you repeat the question, Brian? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
my headphones cut out.
It's essentially like where did you get the idea for the witch and the
Yeah.
transferal of memory?
I don't know. I mean, that's the honest answer. I feel like this is the genuine question. Like, where do ideas come from? is an excellent question. And I wish that I knew, and I wish I could give you an honest answer. I feel like also a friend of mine who's much better at math than me was like, wow, that witch lady has been inside you for a third of your life. And I was like, ah. But it's true. It's really shocking to me. And I feel like I got this idea before I knew how to write it. And it took a lot of the world changed and I had a lot of help. And it's mysterious. It's mysterious to me why I couldn't write it. And then one day I felt like I could. I find that encouraging and discouraging, I'm sure, for the other writers out there, you know. Like I feel like human children came on like a much more orderly clock than any of these people. Speaking of, yeah, the gestation is not linear.
Well, what about, okay, a follow-up question is about the scarecrow. It's similar, or,
Yeah, the
like,
scarecrow has always been there. You know what I can't tell you? I mean, I wrote a story about a scarecrow for Conjunctions, like in 2009, the Graveless Doll of Eric Mutis. So I guess I was thinking about scarecrows then. There's something terrifying to me about them in a wonderful way. I could show you like my favorite chapter, maybe in this book, is the scarecrow's first chapter, and it's one sentence, and it just says, "I was not annihilated, whatever I was." And it's not even really fair. It's like a sentience or a spirit trapped in a scarecrow. And I'm like looking to show you the picture, like a anyway.
I know, yep, I can try to find it as well. I know what you're talking about,
Through the bookstore, you'll see
but
that. Like you know what to picture.
mhm.
I don't know. I remember reading Beckett's Malloy and some of the kind of chattering existential comedy and the darkness and the beauty. Um, and the real, yeah, there you go. That's the, I still think that's like the best chapter.
Love
Uh,
it.
I you know, and I thought that in this weird symphony that exists inside this book, that particular perspective and voice felt really came to feel really necessary to sort of the rhythms, and also to like the scarecrow can ask some questions that I don't think anybody else in this novel really has the authority to ask, or the I mean, just like the literal vantage test. But I do also remember telling my best friend, I thought the scarecrow was going to be hilarious, you know, and I can't say that that is really how it panned out. Um, like the
The,
jokes dust ratio here very heavily freighted towards the dust. And my best friend was like, was that a realistic expectation for a guy made of straw that he was going to like carry his narrative weight? And I thought that was hilarious. Much
well,
fun. But I hope you, I don't know. I love the Scarecrow. Thank you guys, those of you who have read it, for giving the
the
scare.
ca- the cat has some funny ones. I mean, this brings me, I just to piggyback on that. I feel like one thing that you and I have talked about is the role that play has in your process and in your work in general. Because what I'm hearing is essentially like kind of these ideas, these images come to you, you something's compelling about them, and you don't question that, you go with it. Can you tell us just a little bit about, yeah, play? How does play
Yeah.
work
You
for
know,
you
and
as a writer?
I want to just thank, because he happens to be in the Zoom and I love him so much. And he helped me so much with this novel, Kav Akbar, who I know, I'm sure all of you love too. Martyr is one of the most serious and most playful books I've ever read, and one of the best books I've ever read. And just to that question about what play can do, I mean, I think that it's helical. It's a weave, right? I don't think that it's separate from seriousness, you know? I think that there's sort of an oscillation that it's like a weather vane, right? It's like you can move between tones. And I think also, you know, life is never any one thing. I love Morgan Talty's work, and he was saying when he really feels like he's written himself into a hole, or he's just sort of he can't access the pleasure of writing anymore. He's like, I don't know, just slap someone with the turkey leg. And I laugh, but I actually think this is the best craft advice. Like, because I don't know, I even the most beautiful writing, if it's just monotone lyricism, I kind of tune out, because there's so much tonal variation in any day. So that playfulness feels important to me too. It's part of, I mean, I have these women in a home for unwed mothers. And I really had a hard time finding firsthand account. You know, I didn't, you know, diaries or biographies about that experience. I found a lot of secondary sources. But I would just assume that laughter helped people survive those institutions. I would just assume, right? And I think about times in our family or in my own life where it's like a belly laugh, like in the abyss, right? And it's something our species, I mean, it's genuinely, I mean, not to be sentimental about it, but I do think like the life wish expressed by laughter um, would have to be a part of a book that is also engaged with this much kind of pain um, and
Yeah.
I don't know, I love, I mean, it's hard to do sometimes, but I really do actually trust. Stephen King calls it the undermined. I like that a little bit
Hmm.
more, even like subconscious or unconscious, like your undermined, because it does feel like that. I love Kelly Link a lot, and I think she's almost like this expert surfer of the undermined. Like if you read her stories, the story shapes in the Kelly Link book are like sui generis, they're so original. And I feel like that's because she really has equipoise on the surfboard as her undermined carries her to like wherever it wants her to go. I mean, it's a real skill and it's hard to talk about.
Hmm.
Like the cat, when the cat sauntered back in, I was thrilled to greet it because I really feel like the book needed whatever energy the cat brought at that particular moment and needed like perspective from a non-human point of view. You just see things a little bit differently. I felt that similarly, the scarecrow, it's almost like the vantage of eternity or something. It's just a different clock to be on.
I love it. And that idea of the undermine too also brings in all these myriad of influences that are just getting blenderized in this book as well, because you're just, pulling from who knows all over the place. It's wonderful. Okay, another question here from the audience here. Um, a novel in progress is a lot to hold in your head, and research for a historical novel is a lot to hold in your head. So, how did you manage walking around with all this while you were drafting the antidote? What is your process for keeping track of research and ideas? And this is from a historical fiction short story writer who's a little bit scared of a novel.
What a great question. Everybody should be scared of a novel. They're like Brian and I know it's like a succubus on your desktop that would eat however much daylight you have and nighttime. It's like a bottomlessly hungry succubus. So our fun is not everybody's fun. I think we can all agree, and your fear is appropriate. Um, I'll show you. Wait, yeah, look at this. I'll just show you. I never do this. Um, Check this out. This is like not my handwriting. This is my husband's handwriting. Uh, I'll just shout him out too, Tony Perez. He's like a brilliant editor, but I mean, anyway, just to give you a sense,
What?
that's what all there, it's all color coded. We had like a little war room thing. We would try.
Yeah, what was that? Those are the like kind of story beats or by character or
Yeah,
what?
it's stuff. I never, no one is ever going to ask this question again when I can like show them this like weird science fair
I
board.
just think to me the best part about that is that he did it for you. That's
I
special.
know.
That Karen,
Yeah.
that's
So I
special.
had
That is love. That's deep.
love. I said it's deep love, man. I mean, I had my version, I had a separate board, if you can believe that. But it is a lot to hold in your head. I found it really helpful at a certain point to have like it would be exactly like what actually happens in this chapter. And that was also helpful because then you sort of see stagnant places or where there's repetition or, what chimes with what. And, there's some of I think there's similar questions and similar kind of psychological experiences that occur in each character's section. So kind of figuring out how to get those. That part feels almost musical, and I don't know how other people do it. It's very with stories. I do feel actually like I can hold it all in my head, but this time we just had like actual color coded index cards. Um, I found one that my daughter wrote when she was 3. Like I transcribed it, and she said maybe the scarecrow is really scared, and he can say bark bark. So it was a family operation. Like we were all, we were all, um, and my editor Jordan Pavlin is amazing, and gave me excellent global notes. So I think part of it too is you can't hold it all in your head, and you do need readers to experience it as a whole thing and let give you some echolocation,
Mm,
so you can know kind of what you made and have a map to revise with.
I love it, and I love the collaboration that's continued. In all these different ways. I have a very specific question that someone put in the chat that I have to ask because I just love it so much. Someone wants to know if that's a poster of Jacques Tati's Mr. Hulot on the wall behind you.
Yes, it is. Thank you for this hyper specific question.
Right? So specific. I love that though. I love Mr. Hello, and I needed to say that before we ran out of time. That's just so wonderful. Thanks for that. Yeah, Emma, do we have time for one more, or is it time to wrap up? You tell me.
One more question?
Yeah. Um, okay, so one more question about the Prairie Witch, and this is a question about is it sounds a little bit like it's based in the same vein as Granny Women in Ozark Appalachian traditions. Was that is this a history part of your research process at all, or has that just happened to be a kind of an echo or a this person's picking up on?
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
I took the AirPods out. I don't know. Yeah. I should have like a big bespoke ear horn. I feel like that's not how
You need
I have
one,
like a
yes,
merch table. I mean,
right?
no, I'm really excited to know that that's something that occurred to you, but I can't say it was like a conscious influence. Although I do love like Woodrow and I love, you know, uh, Missy Mazzoli and I are working, she's from that part of the world. We're working on a dark fairy tale about the opioid crisis set in Appalachia. Um, but I can't say that that was a conscious influence of mine.
Cool. Thank you. Hey, could do a quick shout out just to say I've been curating this series for the past 50 days called 100 Days of Creative Resistance. It's an email a day for the first 100 days of this Trump regime. And Karen has one coming up tomorrow. And I'm just going to put the link in the chat here. This is a free thing. It's if you just follow there, it's just like put your email in if you want to get them. And if you don't, that's cool. But Karen wrote a really beautiful one. And if you want to read it, you should sign up. And
Oh,
I'll put a
guys, friends, sign up for this. I mean, I've been reading them. I start every morning with them, and that is an antidote. Like it really, um, it is an aquifer of like no bullshit hope and great prompts and just great feelings of solidarity right now. Um, Speaking of the life wish, I mean, thank you, Brian, for curating like that aquifer for us.
yeah. It's we need as much active, hopeful, optimistic, and community things as we can. And this has been wonderful. Karen, it's always just wonderful to share space with you. The antidote is just incredible, and it's just such a gift. And it's not a surprise that it took a 16-year long journey to arrive at this just magnificent and detailed, layered work of art that I really do feel like people are going to be unpacking and discussing for years to come because it's just so it's really special. So thanks.
Thank you, Brian. That really means a lot to me. And it's like motivation truly to keep writing because you and other, just the kindest, smartest readers are out there.
Well,
Thank you guys for spending this time with us. It was really fun.
yeah, on behalf of poets and writers, I just want to say thank you so much for this brilliant, luminous conversation. I feel like I'm leaving with some hope loosened in my own chest. It was just a gift to hear that reading and to hear you two talk about this fabulous book. And Karen, I know all your true believers are wishing you the best as you set off down the yellow brick road tomorrow with this book. This is your reminder, audience members, that you might want to go ahead and do a pre-order. Again, you can find a link in the chat to bookshop.org where you can check out the book. And also, just again, we'd love to have you with us as members at Poets and Writers. We're ready for you and for your community. So thank you so much all for being here and have a great night.
Love you, Emma. Love you, Brian. Thank you all for coming.
Yay.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Poet.
thanks everyone. This has been awesome.